I am 34 years old and go by Alex. My family was always larger than life itself growing up. The heart and soul of our company was my grandfather, who started the series of BBQ restaurants back in the 1960s. From the bottom up, his enthusiasm and diligence created an empire. Upon his death, the legacy was expected to last. But the reality differed greatly from what he had imagined. The obligation passed to my Uncle Greg and Father Charles when my grandfather passed away. Though both had spent years working for the family company, none of them really knew how to run it. Unlike my grandfather, they lacked a commercial bent. They had always turned to him to make difficult decisions, and they stumbled without him. Rather than pushing forward, they kept running the company as they always had, without modernizing, without any meaningful plan, without any sense of purpose. I was the young lad supposed to carry the weight. Since I was old enough to carry a tray, I recall working in the restaurant, sweeping floors, washing dishes, doing everything else, but without getting paid. For years, I worked without question, all the while seeing my cousin Ryan, my uncle's kid, live a life of luxury. It was always, "You're part of the family. You don't get paid for helping out." He never raised a finger. He would visit the restaurant once in a while, behaving as though he were doing us all a favor just by showing there. The golden child, the one everyone expected to inherit the company one day, was Ryan. Though Ryan showed little desire in working, my Uncle Greg often intimated that Ryan would inherit the family business. While I was the one laboring away, doing all the heavy lifting, he was more preoccupied with his social life, partying and travel. I lowered my head, believing that eventually my efforts would be acknowledged for their dedication, and that somehow they would change things. But I came to a terrible awareness as the years went by. Nothing was ever going to change. To my parents, I was simply an expansion of the company. No words of encouragement or gratitude for what I accomplished. Every time I cleaned up after hours or worked extra, I did it without a single word of appreciation. Rather, I was told all the time that I should be appreciative of working for the family company and preserving the legacy, as though that were the only thing that counted. Ryan kept coasting through life meantime. He never had to give money or a career any thought. He was not under obligation or expectation. I felt as time went on as though all of it was crushing me. I felt as though they were undervaluing me even though I was working for the family company. It never was sufficient. No matter how hard I worked or how many hours I put in, every time I tried to stand up for myself or ask for something in exchange, I was advised to be glad to support the continuation of the family. One dialogue comes clearly to me. That afternoon was raining, and I was covering the supper shift. When my father arrived, he settled down at the bar and began discussing how Ryan would shape the company going forward. He responded, "Ryan's got the vision, you know. He's got the drive. He will take over one day." I wanted to yell. And me, regarding the years I had invested in this area, what? I could only answer though, "Yeah, sure." My conditioning had been to serve the family, to labor without question, and to never expect anything in return. Every time I felt as like the strain was drowning me, I reminded myself that this was my obligation and that it was just part of living in the family. Deep down, though, I realized I couldn't continue this way. Working toward a future never going to be mine. I had spent my whole life. I felt worn out, weary of being unseen. Weary of seeing Ryan presented with everything on a silver platter. Weary of laboring for a family that ignored me and devalued me. Every time I tried to express my emotions, though, I was ignored and advised that I was either exaggerating or overly sensitive. More than this appealed to me. I felt like building something of my own. I wanted a job free from the ties to a family company that would not even value my diligence. But I got caught. At least that is what I believed at the time. I was caught in a cycle of false allegiance and self-giving. The weight of the family legacy seemed to be smothering me, and I had no idea how I may break out. Then the day that fundamentally changed things. It was a normal family dinner, a sort of gathering where we would all sit down and pretend that everything was good. Ryan was there, laughing and joking as usual, while I sat in the background finishing all the chores. But that evening, something inside of me snapped. I could not carry on doing it. I could not keep acting as though I was happy with my position in the family. I could not continue to be the one doing all the work while Ryan received credit. That evening, I decided what to do. I was going to walk out from the family company from the never-ending cycle of labor without reward, from the position I had been compelled into. I was going to walk away. It was time for me to write my own future and leave my mark on the planet, and I was not going to allow anyone stop me. Little did I realize, though, that choice would start a series of events altering all things. Heartbreak, betrayals, and hardships would abound on the road ahead, but it would also be the start of my own narrative, one in which I forbade anyone from determining my value. Among the toughest things I have ever done was leave. For years, I had been tied by obligation, custom, and a false feeling of loyalty, chained to the family company. But the words escaped me almost before I could stop them that evening, as I sat there listening to Ryan discuss his most recent trip. I'm done. My choice was not a snap one. It had been developing gradually over years, like a storm far away. It all came flooding back, all the evenings I spent shutting the restaurant and all the weekends I gave up while Ryan was gone living his carefree life. My life was no more mine. This unspoken commitment I had with my family had taken it. I was supposed to put my aspirations on wait, to work nonstop, to never want anything in return. For what then? To watch Ryan have everything handed to him? I so made the decision to go, but it would not be simple. For my family, I was indispensable. At least that is how I felt. Always the dependable one. I had worked silently while everyone else savored the results of my effort. I also knew it wouldn't be welcomed when I told my uncle Greg and father, Charles, about my choice. The way my dad looked when I told him I was leaving the family company will never fade. Originally, it was disbelief rather than wrath. Why I would leave something that had been handed down through the years eluded him. "You are losing your future," he remarked. "Alex, this is your legacy. You are the one expected to continue on." But I had no desire to keep it going now. Being the invisible worker, the one doing all the heavy lifting while everyone else coasted, weary me. Dreams of my own were never going to come true as long as I was caught in that cycle of working for others without being noticed or appreciated. I wanted to create something of mine apart from the family company. Though initially I considered beginning anew in an entirely other field, I soon came to see I still had value. For years I had been observing the marketing landscape change, silently learning about branding, advertising, and how businesses were using social media to increase their profile. I resolved I wanted to work in marketing. I didn't make a casual decision. It seemed like a fresh start, but also a means of escape. The reaction from my family when I informed them I was returning to school to study marketing was as anticipated. My dad was enraged. "You're wasting time and money on some fancy degree," he remarked. "You run a business right here. You don't have to go play with these contemporary styles." Of course, stung. About one thing, he was correct. I had no need to show up for classes. My entire life, I had been employed for the family company, and I had gained more than sufficient knowledge about business management. But I have to do this for me. I had to show that I could create something of my own free will, without depending on the family name, free from carrying their expectations. I thus sought for scholarships, looked for part-time employment to help me, and put out great effort to keep my goal alive. Not easy at all. There were evenings I spent late studying, worked a shift at a neighborhood coffee shop, then got up early for class. However, I did it. I was able to lay a basis for myself gradually that was independent of my family or the restaurant. For me, it was. I grew more self-assured the more I knew. After earning a marketing degree, I soon landed a job with a small marketing company. Though it didn't really matter, I wasn't making that much money. I sensed value for the first time in my life. My suggestions were given some thought. I was part of something that belonged to me, not merely a gear in a machine. And that sentiment was really valuable. But I was unable to avoid the draw of my family as my new life developed. Every now and again, I would hear from my uncle or dad. They would tell me how the restaurant was failing, how they needed my assistance, how close the company was to collapse. Every time the shame struck me strongly, I knew without me they couldn't do it. They had always looked on me, and I had been the one running things for so long. The guilt would turn in my gut. But then I would convince myself that I was no more that person. Now I dream too, for myself. One phone call comes quite clear to me. Late at night, I was working on a project for a customer. When my phone rang, it was Dad. I picked up, anticipating the typical grievances about the eatery. Rather, he declared, "We need you, Alex. The company is implacably broken. Only you could make it right. Though they kept coming back to me in my head, this time their grasp on me was less. Not that young man who had given his life for the family. Guilt was not going to control my decisions anymore. I hadn't given it all up for a company that never really appreciated me. I had worked too hard to be where I was. I'm not coming back, I told my dad. The truth. Uncle Greg and you must work it out. I now follow my own road. On the other side of the phone, quiet prevailed. Then he remarked, I don't know, Alex. You are turning away from us. I was not, however, giving them up. I was at last picking myself. My former life came to an end on that phone call. Though it hurt, it was a necessary break. Though it was the toughest decision I have ever taken, leaving the family company turned out to be the best one. I knew I had done the correct thing even though my family did not understand. Nothing, no shame, no family obligation, was going to stop me from building my own destiny. A few years went by, and aside from the family company, I had developed a career for myself. I had moved on, discovered something that gave me value, and gradually I began to acquire the kind of independence I had never known. But years passed, and I could still feel the weight of my family's heritage hovering over me. Every time I visited home or chatted with my parents, there was a faint expectation that I would ultimately make a comeback to the company. They seemed to believe I owed it to the family name, to save what my grandfather had laboriously created. Then it occurred. One evening, my phone rang late, and on the caller ID I found my father's name. I answered, yet I felt both interest and horror. The voice on the other end lacked the upbeat, self-assured tone my father used. Rather, it was taxed and desperate. We're in trouble, my father started, hesitating as though he were looking for the correct words. Ale, son, the restaurant is not doing well. We really need you back off. Only you can make it right. I hesitated. Now they were calling me back after all this time and after all the years I had spent cracking my back for this family. But these days, family was only one aspect. This addressed survival, and for once, I understood it was more about their need for me than about their perception of my value. We have exhausted all possibilities. Not anything is working. It's a mess. My dad went on. Ryan is not stepping up, and we just cannot get the company back under control. We want your assistance. The weight of the exchange permeated the air. I knew I had to be sensible even though I could feel the pull and urge to go back. I could not return under the same circumstances. I had worked hard to release the hold of the family, and I wouldn't let myself slip back into it without making sure my efforts would at last be acknowledged. After a protracted silence, I'll help, I offered. I am not returning without some stipulations, though. I am not acting in your best interests here. You have always treated me as though I am replaceable, that I don't count. This time it will be different. On the other side, there was extended quiet. My father was clearly attempting to make sense of what I had said. He said at last, "Words? Alex, this relates to saving the company. Negotiations is not appropriate right now." But I was firm. "You want my assistance? Correct. But this is how it will turn out. I am first grabbing 40% of the company. I am going to be a partner. Second, from here on out, I want control over our operations, including marketing, staffing, menu adjustments. Third, my pay should represent the effort I will be putting out, not working for free anymore. No more of this family discount." Another stop was evident. Then my father said, "You know that's not how we've always done things." "That's exactly why I'm demanding these things," I interrupted. "You have run this company right down to nothing. I have observed it for years. This time, should I be returning? I am doing so under terms. You will have to see my value if you wish my experience." Tension on the other side of the line was palpable. It offended my father. He agreed, though, based on the desperation in his voice. "Fine," he answered at last in a tense voice. "Still, you have to realize this is a family company. We cannot simply turn over control in that manner." "Then we're done," I responded, my voice steady. "You have to hand me the reins and want me. Stop ignoring me." The talk stopped there, and I was left feeling both relieved and uneasy. I had just ventured greatly at risk. Though I was done living by their norms, I had set myself up for a fight with my own family. The old approach had failed, and I was not going to let it pull me down once more. I worked for several weeks organizing stuff. I planned, established goals, and made sure I was ready to meet the great difficulty ahead. Though I wasn't sure whether I could turn the company around, I wouldn't allow the legacy of my family vanish just because they were too stubborn to adapt. The first thing I observed upon getting back to the restaurant was the degree of decline. The decor looked old, the atmosphere was dead, and the cuisine, well, it was the same awful BBQ that had been presented for decades. There was no actual attempt to fit current trends or create an engaging or trendy restaurant environment. I had plenty of work ahead of me. However, I was ready. I started right away changing the website for the restaurant and building an online ordering system. To appeal to a larger clientele and modernize the menu, I included fresh selections, healthier choices, and appealing to encourage returning business. I even instituted a loyalty program. Still, the true test came from within the family. My thoughts intrigued neither my father nor uncle. They didn't believe in social media as a valid marketing tool or trust the digital world. Social media is just a fad, my father would remark. We need not waste time with that. I planned not to back down. Along with updating the company as much as I could, I battled for every choice, advocating change. Still, Ryan presented one more problem. He was doing nothing at all. He would seldom ever help, show up late, vanish for hours. Still, my father and uncle viewed him as the golden child, that one supposed to inherit one day. Among all the decisions I had to make was the toughest. I have to fire Ryan. It was the only means to ensure the company might once more flourish. I couldn't let slowness to continue destroying everything. My father and uncle objected, but I stayed to ground truth. Ryan was leaving. Though I expected it to be difficult, I believed the restaurant could at last start to heal once Ryan was out of the way. Though imperfect, at least it had a fighting chance, or so I considered. That day I quit the company run by my family wasn't a simple one, but I felt liberated as soon as I left the restaurant door. At last, I was beginning to run my life. A legacy not even mine to carry would not define me. What I did not anticipate, though, was the way my family would respond, or how much more difficult things would get before they improved. For months, I turned entirely within. I started reconstructing my career after landing a new work outside of the family company. I moved little steps to rebuild my confidence and remind myself that I was someone with goals and possibilities of my own, not only the family servant. For the first time in my life, I was living for me. It felt as though a weight had been taken off my shoulders. Then, though, arrived the phone calls. First, it began with my father. One evening following supper, he called and his voice was clearly desperate. "Alex, things aren't going very well here," he said. "We want your assistance. The eatery is not doing well. You should return." I objected initially. I wanted no more to be pulled back into the poisonous surroundings I had just left behind. But the words of my father haunt me still. The family was in legal hot water. The company was not doing well. Without me, my Uncle Greg was swiftly sinking. He had no idea how to turn things around. Though I tried not to acknowledge it, a part of me felt accountable for the company. Though it wasn't in a position I had chosen, I had spent most of my life striving for it. More importantly, though, I aimed to demonstrate that I could do things differently. I wanted to let my family know I was more than simply a background worker. I possessed the expertise, the ability, and the drive to turn around the company. I promised them I would return, but under my own terms. There is no free employment anymore. You are no longer being considered as the unseen family member. I needed them to realize I was going to seize control. I was both determined and nervous as I turned back into the restaurant. It was different than the place I had left. The once bustling eatery had lost appeal. There was no vitality in the air. The decor was antiquated, and the floors were unclean. Though I knew it wouldn't be simple, I was ready to meet whatever obstacles stood ahead. I initially got to work dissecting the company from the bottom up. I examined closely the marketing, the menu, the customer service, everything. I noted right away the obvious problems. The restaurant had worst of all non-existent marketing strategy, nil internet presence, no website, and no social media. It was buried in the past and would not survive in the current market without a radical makeover. I went to work. I changed the menu to include some healthier choices and developed a loyalty program for frequent patrons. I also developed a website and put an online delivery mechanism into use. It was about more than just upgrading. It was about improving the restaurant's customer friendliness and catering to the demands of today's market. But resistance greeted all of these developments. Especially, my father found it incomprehensible why we should alter the menu or have an internet presence. He considered it to be a financial and time waster. "We've always done this way," he would say. "And we've always done well. Why should this be changed right now?" Uncle Greg fared no better either, thinking that word of mouth was all we required. He didn't want to spend money in internet marketing. The truth was that they had been mired in their ways for far too long to see the world was changing. Then there was Ryan, who showed in late and grumbled about his lack of participation in decision-making, even though I insisted on him assuming more responsibility. Though he showed no initiative or willingness to help, he remained the company's heir. The turning point was deciding to let Ryan go. He was not contributing to the company, and I would not be letting him coast on family favoritism moving forward. When I told my father and uncle I was allowing Ryan to leave, they went bananas. "You cannot simply let him go," they shouted. "His family is great." Still, I remained firm. Not going to let the company collapse in order to boost Ryan's ego was I advised them that we couldn't let bias skew our judgment if we were to rescue the company. Now, family ties were not the issue here. This had to do with survival. The family became split over Ryan's rejection. Furious with his father and uncle, the restaurant's environment grew increasingly hostile. Why they missed what I was trying to do eluded me. I was attempting to preserve all they had created, not to damage anyone. To them, though, my choice amounted to a betrayal, and the hatred started to sour. Notwithstanding all the conflict, things started to get better. The modifications I put in place started to show effects gradually, but definitely. Customers started complimenting the new menu and the better service as the internet orders started arriving. Even foot traffic to the restaurant started to show increases, but the gaps in my relationship with my family were simply becoming worse. Even as the company started to recover, they saw nothing of success in what I was doing. They considered it as a required evil, something I had to do out of duty. And that was when I understood I would never really win with them. The expectations of the family were always there, guiding me to give up my own aspirations for theirs. I was supposed to put the company above my personal needs and ambitions. Their expectations were already beginning to weigh familiarly once again on my life. I became much more resentful as the months went by. Though the company was stabilizing, I was still entangled in the family dynamic that had always made me feel inadequate. Returning to show the family what I could do, I had come to save them. But what I was discovering was that I would never be more than a tool for them to employ, regardless of how much I gave up or how hard I worked. Less I was regarded, the more I gave. They took more. If I stayed, I knew I would once more lose myself. The company belonged to them to wreck. It was not mine to salvage. And no matter how hard I tried, I was never going to be able to escape the expectations and obligations of a family that did not know me. It was time for me to make still another difficult decision. I was done. Though the company was in better health than when I had begun, I would not be sacrificing my future for their blunders anymore. Though I had rebuilt my life around them, I had rebuilt the company. It came time for me to advance. Not long after deciding to distance myself, I started to realize the real face of what my family expected. In my life, things had started to get better. Yet, the more I separated myself from the company, the more I became aware of the extent I had been taken for granted. Though I felt I had left the suffering behind, the calls persisted. Dad or Uncle Greg would phone every few weeks pleading with me to come back. "You're the only one who can save it," they would say. "The business is on the verge of collapse." The guilt kept slinking in like a sluggish poison. Though I knew they needed me, each time I heard those words, I also heard the years of bitterness and frustration I had been carrying inside. Given they had never really appreciated my work, how could they want me to come back? When they had taken my whole life for granted, their asking me to come back in a manner almost too much to ignore marked the last straw. They were pitching me Chief Operations Officer, though below, it was something deeper, a title that seemed to solve all their woes. It became evident from listening to the discourse that they were providing me a means of rescuing them and their failing company, not a partnership. They wanted me back to tidy the mess they created. Though I could sense their desperation, it simply strengthened my will not to go back. And then I heard the unimaginable just when I felt it couldn't get worse. Greg, my uncle, who I had always been close to, called and said something that destroyed any faith I still had in them. "Ryan is going to be the new CEO," he remarked, sounding as though he were making a kind statement. "You have done your share, Alex. His turn now comes first." Ryan, the slothful, entitled cousin who had never participated in the family company, was scheduled to be CEO. The words feel to the face like a slap. I had fought painstakingly to restore the family restaurant, bring it back from the verge of bankruptcy, only for them to toss me aside and assign my position to Ryan, who had just contributed his last name. It seemed unbelievable. Following all I had done, all I had given up, they were giving the one person who never valued any of it the keys to the kingdom. It seemed like a total turnabout, not even the decency to personally tell me. I was not even worth a discussion. They simply assumed I would stand aside and turn over the keys without thinking twice. When I challenged them about it, my father answered coldly and detachedly, "Alex, you have done your share. You no longer are needed here. Ryan is the horizon. You never seemed suited for this." Those remarks probe farther than I could have imagined. They gave me all I need knowledge. I wasn't in demand. To them, my diligence made no difference. It had never made a difference. Once they obtained what they wanted, they threw me like I was nothing. I was simply a tool to salvage the family company for them. Then I realized that my position in their life was more of convenience than of family. When it came time, they sought my assistance. Yet, they didn't give me any thought once the storm passed. Though it was a terrible awareness, I had to face it. I decided at that same instant, I never would return. I would forbid them using me anymore. Understanding that it was the only way I could ever be really free, I turned away, knowing I was severing relations with my family. Taking what meager financial stability the company had given me over the years, I sold my ownership there. Though hardly much, it was sufficient. Though it was a difficult pill to swallow, it was one that was absolutely vital. The calls stopped thereafter as well. Her relatives stopped trying to get in touch. I offered it, but they did not seek for my assistance. The restaurant kept faltering, sliding more into financial disaster, but I was nowhere to see it go apart. I sensed control for the first time in my life. Failures or expectations from my family did not define me. My own decisions defined me, and at last I was free to shape my future any way I wanted. Though it still hurts, the treachery was no weight I had to bear. I came to see that I had made the correct decision as the company owned by my family sank. I had turned away from a life that would have kept me little and invisible, always in the shadow of the mistakes of my family. I did not need them to flourish. Their permission was not necessary. Having come to stand on my own, I had discovered my own road forward. My future was to shape, not theirs to prescribe. More importantly, though, provided the tranquility I had been yearning all my life. Things started looking good not too long ago. The eatery started to exhibit indications of life once more. The other employees took front stage when Ryan left, and my changes were beginning to pay off. New customers were arriving to sample our revised modern menu as returning ones were returning. Sales were rising, and the family company seemed to have a bright future for the first time in a long run. But I started to see something disturbing as the months went. My family was still treating me like a temporary cure. They did not seem to really appreciate the effort I had put into writing things. They seemed to view me as merely the hired aid they had required to save the day, not as a partner who had earned his place. Then arrived the day that broke all. One morning I arrived at the office to discover my father and uncle talking in subdued tones about something. They stopped chatting as I arrived, but it was too late. Their facial expressions told it all. Behind my back they had been planning, and it felt like a slap across my face when they unveiled their scheme. "Alex, we decided it's time for Ryan to take over," my father remarked frankly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He's ready. He possesses the kind of leadership required." The ground felt as though it had changed underfoot. Ryan questions? In light of all I had done, they were returning the control to him after all the effort I had put into rescuing the company? One individual who had done nothing except coast alongside while I carried the weight of the whole family legacy? "You're kidding," I said, staring at them, incredulity and rage building inside me. My voice hardly covering my anger, I said, "You are returning everything to him?" They sought to explain it. Ryan had been more involved lately, they informed me, had learned a lot from my hard work, and was the one who could bring the restaurant forward. It was all only a justification. The truth was, they valued nothing what I had accomplished. They never really appreciated me, never considered me as anything more than a tool to preserve their dying company. My tummy turned over. I had given this place my time, my energy, my knowledge, everything, and at last, they were just going to toss me aside. They had never quite seen me as an equal. They had always seen me as expendable. "I'm done," I responded, resolutely but shakingly. "I'm out. I'm not hanging about to be treated this way." It was too late. Although they attempted to persuade me to stay and remind me of all the sacrifices they had made for me, they had nothing to offer in return. I had given them everything I possessed. Working for individuals that didn't appreciate me wasn't going to squander another second of my life. I sold my shares, kept the money in pocket, and left. I was leaving the family, not only the company. I came to see that all I had truly earned was a lifetime of bitterness and treachery. Although I had spent so many years attempting to satisfy them, earn their respect, a peculiar sense of liberation swept over me. As I walked out of the restaurant that day one last time, I was anchored to my own expectations rather than anyone else for the first time in my life. Their failure was no more something I had to bear. I didn't have to keep giving myself up for folks who had never really seen me. Following months were among the happiest of my life. I put money into myself, in my own development, and discovered a different road free from historical ties. Without anyone's intervention, I launched a modest business of my own, something I could at last call my own. Nobody needed me to respond anymore. My family's restaurant steadily sank into ruin in parallel. My modifications were reversed without me, and it returned to the same old rut. Ryan remained as ineffectual as before, and the company sank once more. Too proud to own their mistakes, my father and uncle watched helplessly as everything fell apart. I was not sorry for them. I had at last found serenity. They had decided their course. I had decided mine. I had left behind the bonds of commitment and entered a future very much mine to mold. And at last I could breathe, first in my life